Hello, welcome to Gendering Geopolitics, the New Lines Institute's Twitter series that consists of short and sharp 10-minute conversations with women who are making waves around the world. My name is Kallie Mitchell, and I'm an analyst at the New Lines Institute. Today, I'm joined by Reem Abbas, a feminist writer and researcher from Sudan. Throughout her career, Reem has developed expertise in women's rights and civic space. Thank you so much for joining me today, Reem, to share your insight on the conflict in Sudan and its impact on women and girls.
Thank you for having me.
On April 15th, fighting broke out in Khartoum and other cities in Sudan between the army and the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary group which had been allies with the army since seizing power together in a 2021 coup. Reem, can you talk a bit about the background of the situation and why it has now erupted into violent conflict?
Yes, absolutely. This conflict has been brewing for a very long time. Sudan had a revolution in 2019 that basically ousted the former government of Omar al-Bashir. When the revolution happened, it was a time when the state was very fragile. In the years leading up to the revolution, there was a conflict in different parts of Sudan, and Bashir had actually initiated and started the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, and Sudan has a long history of like militarization and special militarization of like different communities because it has a long history of the central government fighting rebel groups in the peripheries, basically. So what happened is in 2019, when the revolution happened, the RSF became one of the forces that were part of the political sphere, basically. And what was really problematic is that the constitutional declaration that was signed to kind of, usher in a transitional government basically legitimized the rapid support forces. And by legitimizing the rapid support forces, they just became part of the political process. This continued to happen until 2021, when the military, which is the armed forces as well as the RSF, overthrew the transitional government of Prime Minister Hamdok in a military coup. And from there, it basically there was a quick downfall when it comes to the economic situation and the political situation. In the month and in the weeks leading up to basically the armed confrontations between the two bodies, there was a political process that was led by the international community, and this political process was supposed to basically start another transition for Sudan. But then this political process, it again also legitimized the RSF and gave them and really empowered them, basically. And the political process, although it was really pushed for the international community and the RSF and the political forces, they really wanted it to happen. The military was against it because it again gave the RSF at its own basically, it legitimized them, and it continued to give them a lifeline to exist as a standalone armed force instead of basically being integrated into the armed forces in a short period of time. The integration process was to happen over a period of 10 years, which was a very long time. So we saw that the conflict was coming because the army was not going to agree to the terms of the political agreement. And unfortunately, basically in the days leading up to this confrontation, the rapid support forces also, in a way, they continue to do a number of actions that were unacceptable to the army. So, for example, they took over, or they tried to take over, a military airport in the northern part of Sudan. So a number of actions were taken that at some point it just became clear that an armed confrontation was going to happen, and it happened. An armed confrontation began in Khartoum. It spread to other cities. Right now, it's contained in different parts of Sudan, but there's still a full-blown conflict happening in Khartoum, which is the capital.
Beyond the horrific number of deaths and injuries being reported, numbers that are rising every day, what is the reality for civilians on the ground in Sudan?
The reality of civilians is quite dire. We are seeing a very difficult humanitarian situation. People are no longer safe in their houses because they are stuck in the crossfire, basically. Some of the aerial bombardment is affecting civilian areas and civilian property. People have lost property. Many families are displaced as a result, and many families are displaced because also the RSF are taking over and occupying people's houses in different parts of the capital. People are fleeing their houses also because of power cuts and water shortages. And water is a very big problem in some parts of the capital where people have not really had water for 5, 6, and even 10 days. So they're thirsty, they're hungry. Supermarkets are running out of food because factories are no longer working. Nothing is functioning. People are no longer able to buy electricity, to buy phone credit. Nothing is working, basically. So the streets are a mess. They're unsafe. People are getting killed on basically at checkpoints. Their corpses. There's a stench basically in the streets of Khartoum because there are corpses lying around there for days. Many people are missing. They have left their houses to get food or urgent supplies, and they never came back. Families are quite desperate.
In a recent article for African Arguments, you wrote that despite the pivotal role that women have historically played in Sudanese political movements, women are continually sidelined in formal political processes and face violent backlash against their attempted participation. What role does this exclusion play into the ongoing conflict? And in what ways might women's political participation improve or change Sudan's peace and security situation?
Absolutely, and I think if you look at the historical dynamics, the Sudanese women's movement have always been tied to political parties in Sudan, and this really disempowered the women's movement because the women's movement were always kind of taken under the wings of political parties, and this enabled an organic women's movement from being formed, and it also really kept women basically in the peripheries of the political process. So they are seen as basically wings of the patriarchy, but they're not really seen as like important decision makers and leaders in political parties. And this is why over and over again, when there is a chance to have for women to be part of the decision making process, they basically only join the process through quotas, and they only join the process when a lot of work is done on the ground to push for women's political participation. So the truth of the matter is, unless you kind of de-link the women's movement from the political movement or the political parties, you cannot really have a strong women's movement that is representative and that is really able to make sure that women are part of the political and peace process in Sudan. But the problem is even deeper. It's not only the patriarchal political parties, it's also the political marketplace in Sudan and how it's formed. Because so a political marketplace is basically a series of transactions that are done to make sure that certain players are basically part of this marketplace. Women are not part of this marketplace because the marketplace is in Sudan the political marketplace in Sudan is controlled by the army, armed groups that have arms and took up arms against the central power and that are then subjugated by the central power through different peace agreements and also by traditional administration or tribal leaders. So women are not really part of the security and military complex or the security and military industry, basically. And women are not really part of the traditional or tribal leadership, setup. So women are really they're really in the periphery of the political marketplace because they don't have, tribal loyalties to offer. They don't have a serious capital to offer that would allow them to kind of like really make sure that they're part of this marketplace. So this marketplace really needs to be challenged and it needs to change. But in the meantime, what women can do is that they can really work together, to build an organic women's movement that is able to really realize the goals of and the priorities of women, and that is also able to kind of really disengage from the dialogue and conversations that are happening within the political parties that are really not talking about the priorities of women. This is a chance for women to come together. Right now, there is a conflict. Women are the ones that are going to suffer the most, whether it's their own security is at stake, their livelihoods. Women are right now. We have heard cases of sexual violence. We have heard cases of missing women, and this really makes it very urgent for the women's movement to play a critical part to make sure that women are part of the political process because they bear the brunt of all the different political mishaps that are happening. And this is already happening. We have seen women mobilizing in a group called Women Against the War. And hopefully this group will just be different from the ones before, in the sense that it will really try to challenge the status quo within the political parties and within the different industries and entities that continue to kind of disempower women politically, economically, and socially.
I think you make a really interesting point about the political marketplace. We talk a lot about women's quotas and how many women are in politics, but there's also that challenge of not only being there, but having the political capital and that worth in the political marketplace to make an impact. So I really appreciated that perspective. The RSF has been accused of sexual violence against women and girls in conflict areas of Sudan. Has this pattern been replicated in the current conflict? And how has the situation impacted women and girls disproportionately from other groups?
Yes. So yeah, I mean, definitely, there were a lot of accusations against the RSF in conflict areas, especially Darfur, especially in the period in 2012 and 2013 and 14, and this is documented in different reports by Human Rights Watch and so on. And the RSF was definitely implicated in sexual violence in 2019 when they dismantled the sit-in in front of the military headquarters in Khartoum and in other places. So there were cases of gang rape and rape of like women and young women, and it was really, really sad. So basically, right now I have heard stories of sexual violence especially in central and northern Khartoum, because right now we're unable to move. It's very difficult to move around because of security reasons. We also had power cuts, internet shutdowns, different things that really made communication also an issue. And of course, everyone is stressed out and everyone is trying to just stay safe. So far, it's been very difficult. Usually we get messages, people communicate with each other, especially as part of the women's movement, and we find out about cases and we try to kind of intervene and provide support. But right now it's a situation where it's complete chaos, so we're really unable to reach the victims or survivors and really provide any support. I think we're already having conversations, of course, about the availability of rape kits, the availability of services at different hospitals, but I feel very helpless, because right now hospitals are getting bombarded, hospitals are getting shut down. Women are, it's just very unsafe for them to move. So it is really a situation where I hope the survivors are able to get the help they need on time. And I hope that we can continue kind of to reach out and support them. But unfortunately, yes, sexual violence is one of the weapons used, and sexual violence is one of the characteristics actually of conflict in Sudan.
What should the international community and the US in particular be doing right now to end the violence and to support democratic movements in Sudan?
I think right now there's a lot of frustration from the side of the civil society in Sudan, because I think the international community was definitely part of the political process that kind of facilitated this conflict situation. I'm not going to say it led to it, but there were so many red flags, that were pointed out, and the international community just kind of kept going on. So I think when we talk about what the international community should do, let's talk about what their characteristics are. I mean, the international community, they want stability. Stability over anything, stability over human rights, stability over democracy, and so on. So, and this is really prevalent because, and to be very honest, I think, in many cases, many people do not believe that, different parts of the world are actually capable of producing any kind of democratic role. So it's that some people in parts of the world do not really deserve democracy, or they should not have democracy, or they don't really have the means to sustain democracy. So there are a lot of ideas that are like very colonial and that are very and that kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and they become facilitated because they come, some of them, of course, not everyone, they have ideas that democracy is not going to happen in Sudan, so they come with this mindset. So then they try to push solutions that kind of just keep the status quo, solutions that are just more rooted in making sure that the country is stable, as opposed to making sure that in the long term, democracy could come, because we do know that, of course, democracy doesn't come in one day. It's a process. So I think this is really what the international community wants. They want stable countries. They just don't want another Libya. They don't want another Syria. They don't want another this and that. So stability for them comes over everything. So definitely the mindset is an issue. It's an issue that is very frustrating. But I think for now, I mean, people are going to talk about the usual need for humanitarian aid, especially medicine. Medicine is definitely going to be needed, and of course, eventually, a political agreement is needed. A political agreement that really solves the issues of Sudan, the root causes, and a political agreement that really that is centered around the civil society and people, and not just political parties, because they really don't represent the interests of the people. And a political agreement that has depth, really, that has kind of clear benchmarks, that are measured, and that are over that, and that have some kind of committees to kind of oversee them and follow up on the implementation and so on. You cannot just start something in a country and then just go away and then expect that things are going to happen. So yeah.
Reem, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today on Gendering Geopolitics, and for lending your expertise to our conversation about the difficult and evolving situation in Sudan.
Thank you for having me.